I have the pleasure of introducing Birgit O'Connor. Birgit is a local artist, lives over in the Tamales Bay area. Something I didn't know about her, I just learned this evening, actually, when I was looking through the biography that Michelle put together for me. Birgit was born in Hamburg, Germany, and came to the United States when she was 10 months old. It's where my grandfather's from, so that was kind of neat. Her father was a master lithographer. Her mother was an amazing photographer, so she had art in her blood. Birgit liked to pursue art in a variety of mediums, including pastel, pencil, oils, designing rubber stamps, and creating a line of children's t-shirts. She tried watercolor in fits and starts, I think, as many of us did, and finding it frustrating. Her aha moment came when she followed one artist's suggestion to make a color chart. She tried it and she was mesmerized by the clarity of the colors she could get. She gradually moved from painting local landscapes into perhaps what she's best known for now. That's her large and luminous florals. And I know in working with Birgit for a couple of years now in some of our workshops that she started, or she actually was painting in, and I think they're called elephant size. Is that correct? And giant imperial size. So these were large pieces that Birgit liked to do. Birgit is a master signature member with the California Watercolor Association, the Northwestern Watercolor Society, and the Louisiana Watercolor Society. She's an award-winning artist, a judge, a juror. She did one of our national shows, I think it was last year, as a juror. And she also developed an e-course available on both interactive and non-interactive sessions available from her website. And hopefully she'll touch on that this evening as well. So with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Birgit and let her do her magic.
Oh, geez. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Joe, and the whole California Watercolor Society are all wonderful. And it's been a privilege to work with you. I really enjoy the society here. And for anybody that isn't a member, I think they should consider joining. It's a great group. And so I took a look through the gallery, and it was interesting to see I have a lot of friends and students and people that I haven't met yet. So it's a real pleasure to be here. So my plan today was to do a hybrid kind of demonstration because, you know, with the storms that were happening, I wasn't sure if we were going to have electricity and all that stuff. So I wanted to make sure that I was all together and tight. So what I first want to start with is, I think I want to share with you a couple things. I want to look at, I have a couple PDFs that you might be interested in, and that way, if that would lead you into my school, if you're interested in joining, and that way you'll also have a better idea about my upcoming schedule and courses that I have. And I have a discount for the California Watercolor Society too. If you want to put in the code CWA20, then you can have a 20% discount on any of my non-interactive courses or anything coming up for a limited time, just so you know. I should have waited to the end, but I'm not like that. So let me show you that I have, let's see, we have our, before I go into breaking down the demonstration, I want to show you this PDF, which I think has been really helpful that you might be interested in. And I'm going to put this link right here within the chat. Let me just highlight this, because as artists, I'll put that in there, and I'll tell you about that. That's the PDF on goal setting. Hopefully I spelled that right. Okay, because that's really helpful right here. And let's get in there. Let's see if we have this. Yes, here's the PDF. Because sometimes we get stuck and let's go here. We get stuck and we don't really realize our goals, because actually I know I've been stuck. A lot of people have had a very challenging year this last year, and whether or not it's this last year or any time, we kind of get these blocks. So the goal setting is a good way to help you have a better idea how to get past it and what's important to you. And you can see here, I have a lot of different things that you might be interested. So I think it's very valuable. And I suggest that you might be interested in that. The other thing I wanted to show you before we get started here is I have another PDF that you might like. Let me get out of this goal setting thing and find my little thing. There it is. All these little windows that are up. So this is the image that I'll be doing today. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But this is a PDF that you can download if you're interested in. It has the material list. It also has the original reference photo on there. And then it prints out in panels. And this is very similar to what I do in my online courses because I provide the line drawing. That way you have a scale image, or you can freehand it or grid it, whatever you want to do. And then there's that CWA 20 right there. Okay, that's just kind of taking care of my business and getting that out of the way so I don't have to think about it anymore. And now what I'd like to do is go into the idea of the reference. Yes, I'm going to go into the reference photo first and tell you about this. So this is the image that I planned on working on, and I wanted to break this down. I'm going to come back to this in a second. I want to break this image down because the technique that I'll be using for this will be basically the same thing that I apply to all my florals. It's like with that spiral back there and the other, anything you see here. It's a foundation that I'm going to be building on today. So let's go to the reference photo. So I think we need somebody, I'm sorry, is that somebody in the background needs to mute themselves. So you might want to check your mics back there. And let's see, so this is the reference photo that I have. And when I was deciding on this particular image, because using a reference photo is exactly that. It's just a reference. It's just an idea. We want to take it beyond what we see. And this is a very old photographs that I have, and I like the space on the right-hand side, but I wanted to make this into just a very small quarter-size sheet piece of paper. And then I was trying to decide, like, how do I want to do this? If I went like this, you can see that this has this funny little petal on the left-hand side. And we have this green leaf here, and that's okay, but I'm not really trying to show the whole flower. I am, but I'm not, because if we have, I know that sounds confusing, but what I'm more interested in rather than the flower is trying to get the emotional response from the viewer. So if I show them this, it keeps the viewer at a distance. If I come in like this, they see everything, but there are things that I don't need here. And then if I bring them in a little closer, it becomes more intimate. And it's a very basic Casablanca lily. So it's nothing really fancy, but like I said, it is a foundation a technique that I want to show you. All right. So if you wanted that original reference photo, then you can go ahead and download that PDF. In fact, let me get to this and I'll put this in the chat for you. Okay. And I also see that I have Sue here and Claire. They are in my, and I've got Susan and Nancy, a lot of people here. And I'm sure that they'd be happy to write something in the chat. If you have a question, I'm sure they'll take a look at that. So this is the PDF for the reference. Okay. I know I spelled that wrong. Anyway, I'll just say reference, refer. There you go. All right. So that covers a lot of the idea of getting started here. I'm going to switch over to another camera for a second. And what I'm going to end up doing is showing you a video, and I've broken it up into sections in case you want to paint along. Or it also gives me an opportunity to stop, and if you want to ask me questions as we go, then that gives us a little pause. Okay, so what I wanted to do is switch over to this right here. because when I do live demonstrations, we can do it this way. But here, this is going to be our focus and trying to get some working with our values in here. And if I want to make this very dramatic, then I'll go with a darker background. If I want to make it a little more happier or light, then I will come back in with a wet into wet background. Now here, this isn't finished. It's just the very beginning. It has no actual structure to it. This does. And this technique that we're going to work on is the same thing that would be applied into something like this, where this is the foundation, a lot of wet into wet. And if there's time, I can come back to this. So we have a foundation here, and then we do a little negative painting and pull out some of the shapes, and then work on detail. So then the same thing would be for this here. I'm going to move this over. Okay, so if we're going to use that technique from the Casablanca lily here, working a wet into wet. I used to work individual petals, but now what I'm doing is wetting the whole thing and then shaping it and building structure, and then going a little darker here and there. And then I break it down either with negative painting or positive painting and developing those forms. And then starting to add shadows, and you can see how the drama starts to develop. Now for this one here and this one, this has more shape. This is a little flat. So if I did a lot of negative painting, a lot of times the image is going to be very flat. So I need to come back in and add more shape to this. And again, if there's time, I mean, I'd love to jump in. I would go right over my shadows and I would develop some shape here and there. But I think for you to get the idea, it would be much better if I just start working on that demonstration for you. So Joe, is there anything I should address before I get started? I think I'll take a look at here.
I think you're doing great. I would encourage participants, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and I will funnel them to Birgit. And at the end of the night, we'll kind of open it up, let the mics open up and talk to you directly. But if you have questions while she's doing the demo, go ahead and put them in the chat and we can forward them on to Birgit.
Okay, thank you. So the reason why I'm going to do it this way is because I think the clarity of the image is going to be better, and also we get rid of drying time and you get to see more than. That's the advantage of all these online courses that we do, is that it's just we get to go much more in depth, more than I could do in a personal workshop or a live a live workshop. No, not live, on location.
Virtual.
Okay. All righty. So here we go. We're going to start with the first section, and let's get started with this. So what I originally thought about doing was talking over it, but what I want to do is actually play for you my thought process as I'm doing this. So if there's a problem, then you can let me know, but I think that this is going to be the best way to approach it. And if the sound is too loud, you can always turn down the volume, or I'll check it on my end here as we go. I was trying to decide. It's a little loud, so there we go. 140, do I want to do it on Saunders? Do I want to do it on Arches? Now, this is Saunders. I'm going to give it a try, just because I like the paper. It has a creamy color to it. It's not a bright white, so that could be a problem because I'm not getting that really bright white lily. But for this purpose, showing you the demonstration, I think it's going to be just fine. So I'm going to be looking at my reference photo here. I'm going to decide the colors that I want. I've got my brushes over here, so now you can't really see this. Before I dissect that, let's look at my palette a little bit. What I have to apply my water is my bamboo hake brush. This is what I usually use, but thinking about the time that we have, do I want to limit the amount of water on the surface, which I can do with a synthetic wash brush. I don't need a puddle of water. I'm not working with a lot of color. I don't need it to flow. I just need it to have a soft transition when I apply my stroke for the shading and shape. Okay, I have my 30 brush right here to soften any edges as needed. And this is a number 20, 14, and 8 Sable Synthetic blend. I have this instead of a squirrel brush because if I use a squirrel brush or a natural brush, I'm going to be applying too much water. So I want to control the amount of water that I'm applying. That's why we have this, and I have this little number 3 synthetic, which I probably don't need, but that is to lift any hair if needed. The colors I plan on using are a permanent rose, a quinacridone magenta. I do have a little Winsor violet dioxazine there. I just have it here. I probably won't use it, but I have a burnt sienna, a French ultramarine blue, a cobalt blue, and a Winsor blue red shade. Now, I do like the French ultramarine blue. I thought I put it in here and I didn't, but that has more of a granular look. If you don't want that, then you need to stay with maybe a Winsor blue red shade or maybe an Andanthrum blue. You're going to have to experiment with your colors a little bit. But that's what I've always used. I also have a tiny bit of indigo here. I'm going to move these over to the side and this over to the side so you can see it a little easier, I hope. There we go. Okay, I did not want to clean up my palette too much because I have a lot of that color there, so I'm going to incorporate that in. So to make the puddle that I need for both of these, the size of the puddle, I'm going to bring water into my palette. I already have a little bit. I sprayed water in here or ran water over it. I have a little French ultramarine blue. I'm going to pull that in here. And I could use a little bit of that pink. That's okay. Not much. I'll take a little bit. I could also use the cobalt blue. I'm going to take a little bit of the burnt sienna and bring it in here. Now I don't really want it purple, I don't want it black, and I don't want it blue. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it up here to get a color that I like. And let's find just a little scrap piece of paper and test the color. Now that has a little more purple because I had the rose in there. That's okay. So what I like about the French ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna is as I apply it, what will happen is that it has a tendency to separate, giving me a two-tone effect. So I'm going to scoot this back over. And I'm going to just focus on one for a moment. Let's do that. I could have had this larger, but that would have been great for you to see. I would assume you've already printed one out. But I wanted you to see what I have always used when I started. And that would always be just a little photograph. So that way it helped me simplify. Now I don't mind the pinks in there, but I'm not really gravitating towards that right now. So I'm going to again take a little French ultramarine blue, a little burnt sienna. I want it more blue-gray. Not really pink. That's just not resonating with me. Here's a little cobalt blue, a little burnt sienna. It's the same thing, just maybe a slight difference. Okay, now looking at my image here, I'm going to grab my 14. This is a 20 brush. If I tried to paint with this, I'm going to flood my petals with too much color. If I use an 8, I'm not going to get much color on there at all. If I use a 14, then I'm able to actually have a little more control. Okay, so let's go to the wash brush right there. I could use the hake brush. If I use this, I have to manage the amount of water on the surface a bit more. I'm going to use a synthetic wash brush. Any wash brush will work. I'm also going to get a little paper towel because I have my palette over to the side here, so I'm not, I don't have my towel, my terry cloth towel, as accessible to me as I normally would. Okay, so that's just going to have it handy. Let's see if you can, there we go. All right. looking at this. I'm going to find a spot where I want to start. I usually like to do 2 to 3 layers of this shading, but I might just do 1. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to start with the largest one. I always have a tendency to do that. Just like our Matilla Hot Poppy, I'm not going to pay any attention to any of these pencil lines. I'm going to get a little water in here. Then let's look at the surface. You can see that I didn't really paint right up to the lines. Some areas are dry. I'm not going to be worried about that. I just need a little water in here. Then I'm going to use my number 14 and go into my color blend. Let's scoot that over to the side. There we go. I'm going to make a larger puddle here. That's blue, cobalt blue, or French ultramarine blue. You can see how I'm mixing this up. I'm using the plastic sheet here. That way I can have fun right on the table. All right, I'm looking at this. I'm going to start in the center and I'm going to sweep out. Even by doing that, I can see that that seems a little more blue than I'd like. So I'll bring more burnt sienna into it. And let's see, I'm just looking for some subtle shadings. I want to direct the petal there. And I'd like a little shading right on this side, but I want to control it more. So actually I'm going to press a little bit, press and taper. Then I'll go over to the next side. This is drying, so if I leave it like this, I'm going to have a line. So I have to pay attention. I can't really jump all the way around the way I thought maybe I could do because this particular paper is absorbing it a little differently. Okay, I'm just adding a little shape here. Now if we leave that alone, that's not going to look very good. But I can go ahead and put that in there. So I'm taking into account the paper. It's more absorbent, it's soaking right in. So for that little line, I'm going to have to scrub it. If it was on the arches, it's less likely to do this. Okay, and then for this line, I think I'll just go ahead and soften that. So right now we're just shaping our petals. And I won't mind that little bit of blue, I'll leave that alone. This is the 20, that's too big. Back to the 14. Now maybe I'll even bring a little bit of that lavender in here. Basically what I'm going to do is just find my petals. Now that is dry, that's a problem. So I'm going to take my 30, remove the extra water, soften that up. And I don't really like the color as much right now, but that's okay. We're just finding the direction of our petals. Now I do like that little hint of blue from our cobalt blue. I think I'll incorporate just a little bit here. Soften. Like that. So you can see how I'm softening these strokes. Now if I used the Arches paper, I'd be doing the same thing. It's going to react just a little differently. Now over here, this has already dried, so I'm going to use my wash brush again. So I would expect that you would be just adding your water and adding a few strokes. You can see I'm not adding a ton of strokes, just a few of them, and I'm focusing on the main petals. Now going down to this bottom petal. I want to go right on the inside here, even though this is very light. I'm going to go right on the inside, right along here, over on this side. And if you don't know where you're at, I'm going to point to it on my reference photo. I do like that hint of blue. That's what I'm in the mood for. Now, if I fuss with that with too much color, we're going to have a problem. I'm going to take my 30 and I'm going to soften. So I'm actually just using the water, lifting some of the color out, trying to direct the shape. This is drying over here. And maybe what I'll do later is do the arches so we can see. We'll see. I'm going to go around right here, add a little stroke, and along that pencil line. Hopefully you can see I'm not really adding a ton of color. I'm just trying to suggest color where I think some shape would be. Then over here, so it doesn't feather out too much, I'm going to take that 30, soften some of those edges, so I'm not going on to too many petals. I need to keep it more in manageable areas. If I go and try to paint every petal, I will have lines. It just won't work. So, okay, I like this idea over here. I'd like a little more shading over there, but that doesn't matter. I don't need that right now. I'm going to move on to this petal. All right, going back to the 14. Let's get a little color right in here. Now, what I just realized, I had quite a bit of water over here. So it's also teaching me how much water do I have in my color blend when I apply it to the paper. So that is easily going to create a little bloom. It's just something I'm going to keep in mind. And then over here, I think I'll add a little color. And I want to turn this, so I'm just going to direct it with the stroke. Now I do have some other white petals in the background if I wanted to focus on that, but I don't, not at this time. So I'm going to leave that alone. And what I want to do, let's look at the amount of water on the surface. That is drier, this is wet, that is stopped. If I leave that alone, I'm going to have a bloom. So I am going to try to soften this and try to even out the amount of water on the surface. But this is what I'm going to do. We're going to start with this. This needs to dry.
Your mic's off, Birgit.
There we go. So that's the foundation of getting started. And then I was going to continue with that. I think just a little bit more so you can see how we put the shadows in there. Do you have any comments or questions at this point, Joe, or what do you think?
I think you're doing great. If anybody has a question, you can go ahead and unmute. Since we're not too crowded here, you could unmute yourself and ask a question.
Okay, or we can wait to the end. Why don't we think about that? Let's wait to the end and I'll continue with the next step because
Great.
All right, okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. And that way they can see the idea and adding the shadows and the shape and whether or not it's a wet on wet or wet on dry. Okay, so, all righty, let's see again. There we go. This is a little drier. And what I'm going to do now is try to build up some depth and separate the petals and dimension. We already have our structure on here. So let's see. We're going to go back to the same colors. Just like that. We're not going to come up with anything really different. And I'm not thinking about the really dark cast shadows. I want some shading. Now, I'm going to show you the basics here, and for any of those really tight details, you can always come back in and do more to it if you'd like. So let's see, what am I focusing on? I'm going to start where I was, and let's see, this little line here is going to be lighter. So I want a little more control, so I'm going to go right underneath this. Thinking, do I like that color? Is that working for me? It's the same, but it is leaning maybe, I'm looking at the value and I'm thinking about, is that too blue, too brown, too gray? What is it, you know? All right, and then I think actually, instead of just shading, I'm gonna go ahead and add the shadow here. And the reason being is I'm thinking about my brush, what's happening, how does it feel in my hand, and I'm going from there. And there is no way to analyze that. Now for this stroke over here, I'm going to just follow that pencil line. just like that. Now for this, I'm going to take a 30, and if I wanted to be more careful, I would probably go just a little slower, and I want this to be lighter, so I'm going to just press a little bit more. So I'm softening those hard lines, and I'm also rotating my brush a little bit. Okay, maybe I want this to be a little bit smaller, so I'm going to just press and like that. So what I want you to notice as we go, am I supporting my wrist? How am I pressing the brush? All of those things. Now I used the 14 for this. I'm going to go to this shadow right here. Thinking about this, I'm thinking, can I do this? Is that going to be okay? Does that leave me enough space in between, or is that all going to blend together? So those are the questions I might ask myself, but I'm going to do it because I want the color to be consistent as I go around. So here I'm going to support my, do I want to support my wrist? Yes, I'm going to support the ball of my hand here. And I just make that a little wider, pull that out a little more, go back to my 30, remove the extra water, and I'm going to press a little harder, not too hard, just harder that I'm not releasing water. And then I'm going to go, here I went like this, now I'm going to go like this and soften. So now I'm pretty pleased with that. And then going on to this one, I'm going to do the same thing, remove the extra water off my hand. We already have our underlying guide, our map is right there. And then I'm going to go ahead right through here on dry paper for a second. Maybe I'll add a little bit more right there. And then take my 30, remove the extra water, and soften. Just notice how I handle the brush. I'm pressing so it pulls out a little bit more. And now I've got a nice edge there. Now, of course, a lot of people will maybe put the background in first so they can see the flower, and that's all fine. The reason why I don't usually do that is because I don't want that background color bleeding into the flower, depending on what I want. So here, let's go down to this one. You can see by a little bit of shading in here how flat these look. I'm going to go ahead, get a little more color, wet on dry, right through here. Let's add a little tiny bit. This is going to be a petal, so I'm going to just add a little contrast right there. That's there. Remove the extra water. And soften. What I'm trying to decide, do I want to have more color on the inside or on the outside? What's important to me? I think I'm going to go along the outside, right along the pencil line. Just like that. And I don't want to really bleed it out too much, so I'm just going to touch the very edge up to the pencil line a little bit to soften it. And then I'm thinking about the shadows that I want on the inside. I can't do that now, so I'll leave that alone. All right, then moving our way down to this one, we're going to continue all the way around, just working the flower, continuing to mix the colors so it doesn't stay separated. And I'm going to go, I don't want it just to be this, it's going to look too flat. Right down through here, maybe expand my brush a little bit. And then down here, maybe I'll add just a little line because I'm thinking I want some detail, but not too much of it. So we have a few little lines. I don't want them necessarily to stay hard because then it's going to distract the viewer. Just going to soften the edge, and if needed, I'm going to press a little harder so it doesn't just spill out and diffuse. Okay, I'm just going to add one more down here. All right, and we're going to take a look at that and continue over to this side. Now I know it's white, so it's hard to see. All right, down here, let's go around this again, mix the color up, pull that out a little bit more. If I leave it that way, it's not going to look good. Take the 30. I don't want to release a lot of water, otherwise I'm losing all that color intensity there. But I want to soften it. I want to shape this. Now, remember the first layer was wet into wet. Now a lot of this is wet on dry. Okay, and then over here I'm thinking, do I want to use the 14? Am I going to get the control that I want? Is that going to be too big? Let's go ahead and bring that up a little bit. Then I'll take the 30, remove the extra water. I don't want to dissolve all of this. I just want to soften that hard line. So sometimes we want that, sometimes we don't. So then I'm going to remove the extra water, go along the edge, soften. I'm going to soften the bottom edge just a little bit. And maybe I'll take that number 8 so you can see all the different brushes that I'm using. And maybe I think this might be too wet right up here, but that's it. I think it'll work. There we go, just a little bit. I don't want all the attention to go to that line, so I'm going to soften. Okay, then coming up into here, we don't have any contrast between these two. I could add a little more color there. I could do that, but maybe I'll hold off and come up into this area because I'll have fewer problems that way. Then I'm just adding to my puddle so I keep my color consistent. And I'm thinking about the amount of water that I have here. How dark do I want to go? I don't want to go too dark. But those are the things I'm thinking about. All right, I'm going to go around this petal. Just a little bit. I'm also thinking about how much do I want to do that. And I think I'm also going to go like that right up there. Remove the extra water. Soften that edge. I'm not going on top of it. I'm going alongside it. And if I need to, I can wiggle my brush. Okay, and then on this side, I'll add a little bit more. I'm going to turn it so I can access it. I think I'll go along this edge. Let's turn this right here. Bring that over a little bit more. And soften. Okay, so that is doing pretty good. It needs to dry. And what I could consider is working on the background. So what I think for this flower, I'm going to check the edges because I want you to see it. And then we can come back in and add some other details. So if we go in here, do I want it to be all indigo? Let's do that. And maybe I'll even use a little green on top of it later. Okay, So I was thinking, do I want to have more wet into wet back there? Do I want to make it dramatic? Those are all the things that I'm thinking about. I'm going to make it dramatic because that's the easiest thing to do. This also needs a shadow, so before I do that, let's add this. I've got the color there. It's drying very quickly actually on this Saunders. Okay, so we have that there. Let's get the background in. The problem I have, that's going to be wet. So let's just do it. I'm going to go up on the top, wet on drying. I'm trying to think, how dark do I want to be? Do I want it to be really dark, or do I want to have some other colors in there? Now, this is not necessarily going to flow in the same way as it does on the arches, so I might have to work it a little more. I'm using my number 20 blend brush. I'm going to try to stay away from that little shadow there. And what I think I might end up doing is coming in with a little permanent stop green. I thought maybe I might glaze over that in a second. I said that, but now I'm going to do it. It's not like we'll see. Let's see if I like that. That's just going to take me a little more time if I do that. And to move it around, I'll lift it up, tilt it. I could make it solid. With the Saunders paper, it ends up taking a little longer to build that color intensity up. At least it just seems like that. And let's go ahead down here. Now, usually we don't, to try to do something like that, like this can take a little while longer, but I think you'll get the idea. So when I look at this, I might want to turn it a little bit more by getting the darker background in there. I'll make adjustments to my flower depending on how much depth I want in here. This is pure indigo right now. And it usually takes about 2 or 3 layers. I'm trying to brush it off into that area. I want you to actually see the flower. This is why I'm doing it this way. I'm going to use more of the indigo. This doesn't really have a lot of shadows in here right now. I thought it would be really nice to have a wet in wet background, maybe light blues, like what we do in the backgrounds and shadows course. But that would take a little bit of just thinking. All right, so I might add another petal back there. We've got some greens here. I'll come back in and add some detail in that area in just a second. Now, I like the Winsor & Newton indigo. It has a nice look to it. Some other brands can look a little dead. Okay. I'm going to turn this around so I can access this area. You can see how it's soaking in. On the arches, it seems to stay more on the surface because it has a harder sizing to it. A harder paper sizing, so that means it doesn't soak into the paper. This has a vegetable sizing, so that means it's softer. And the color will continue to, it just takes a little longer. It has a softer feel to it. So I'll continue this over here. Then you can see we've got that petal back there. I actually want to push that back. So I'm going to soften this by pressing a little harder. Just to soften it. And I'm also going to take that color, remove it, and try to avoid just coming back in all the time on that one. Okay, so now that diffused edge will push back, hopefully. We need a little detail there. And then we'll go over to this one. Now, I could look at the reference photo. All I'm going to do right now is think about contrast. And I'm going to use the idea of the greens in the background. That's also giving the inside time to dry. If you want to mix a green, you can. This is a little permanent sap green. I'm just going to go wet into wet on this side. Okay, so I can always do more with this in a second, so let's look at that. Okay, so we have the basic idea of the flower. Now I'd have to think about where would I want to push and pull. I'm not worried about that yet. I want to pull the shadows from the stamens in, and then I want to think of more depth. The background to me seems a little light, but that's okay. Okay, so then going to our shadows, which are going to be right here of our stamens. I could wait for this to dry, so that way I don't drag color anywhere. Let's just soften this edge right here. It's feathering in a way that I don't want. And again, remember, water, remove the extra water. And then going along that edge, I'm trying to avoid that, oops, trying to avoid it bleeding. And if it is, we'll just deal with that. Let's go into the shadows here. Gonna make more color. French ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, or cobalt blue, burnt sienna. I don't want it to be too blue. I want a nice blend. Let's think about where our shadows are going to be. We already have this. We just need to pull everything out. Like if I look at this here, that's still light. I need it to be darker to pull this forward. I need some contrast. All right, looking at the shadows. I'm going to use the tip of the brush. And pull that out. I'm thinking I might like a little more water in here because I just like that in the shadows, so I think I'll just add a little more water into this. Plus I'm using this Saunders, so I'm not sure if I'm going to like that as much. The shadows, the way I normally like it. I don't want them to be thick and heavy and pasty. I want some transparency here. I'm going to press and I'm going to lift and bring that down. Then working my way around, let's go to this one. I'm going to press and widen my stroke. Looking at more of a mid-tone to darker value. And I don't want it to be flat, So I'm going to bring in a little more water. I'm just trying to control my stroke there a bit more. All right, then going down into this one, I'm going to scoop up my color. Let's go right underneath this. Go a little darker. I'm changing the angle of my hand all the time. And I'm going to try to scoop this up. Now I'm standing up. If I want details, I'll be sitting down. Or like right there, I don't like the way that looks. So I'm going to take a smaller brush and just try to clean that up. And I don't want that to look flat. So I'm going to use water and pull that in here so we have like a sort of a, not really a two-tone, but we have two different values. Okay. So now our petals are starting to separate. Now going back to this area, thinking, what do I want to enhance? I think I might do this just a little bit more. Pull that out because I don't want just darker shadows here. I want to incorporate that into the rest of my painting. Let's see. I want to soften it, but I don't want to apply a lot of water. So my 20 is really dirty, so I'm going to use my 30 and just soften, trying to control the amount of water that I have here. And then over here, let's add just a little hint of a, I don't know what we're going to call it, a little angle. Now if I leave it that way, then that's all we're going to see. I don't want to soften too much. We want shape. Okay, actually I think I'm going to bring a little detail right into the center. Let's go right up here. You can look at your reference photo and see wherever you think there needs to be a few details. Now I want to go darker there, but I am not working on that yet. I'm working on my petals. I've got a little glob of paint there. I'm going to add a little more French ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, maybe a little indigo, or sorry, not indigo, cobalt blue, same colors. Now I'm going to come right up here. And clean that up. Now one thing I noticed is that I wasn't getting the angle that I wanted, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that around. We're right in here. I want a cleaner line. Let's take a look. What is that going to look like? Something like that. And if I really want that to be clean, I would maybe use a 3 just to get a cleaner line, but that's if I'm doing my own painting and really want to fuss with it. You know, maybe just, I don't need much, just a little clean line. Okay, so that's working on its way into the center. I'm evaluating everything here. I'm going to take a little more color, turn my reference photo. Let's look at that. And I'm going to soften just a little bit. And maybe I'll soften this. I'm not releasing water, I'm just softening the edge. Maybe I'll reshape that. If I want that to stand out more, I'll take some of this, go back over this, just I'm reapplying where I've already have that color. Take the 30, remove the extra water, and soften. And how I would continue to evaluate this is that I would continue to step back. Now I'm happy with how this is going. Let's go back here. That's pretty flat. How can I pull this forward? Push that back. I'm going to use my 14. And let's see, I think right through here. I'm supporting my arm. Oh, let's see, where do I need to maybe soften anything? Again, I don't want that to stand out too much. What I really wanted was the contrast here and here. So I will soften this. And I think I want that area to go back a little more. I'm going to continue with that mid to darker value. Create a bit more color. That's too brown. All right, right down here. And then if we really want to be fussy, it has those little spiky things. So if I want them in there, then maybe what I'll do is I'll add a few. By doing a little negative painting. If that's important to you. And then I'll just pull this out a little bit more. Okay. All right, so you can see we're gradually working our way around and developing it. I'd like this to stand out. So I'm going to go to my color combination. I'll bring a little more blue into this. Now the difference with the French ultramarine blue versus the ultramarine blue is just the the pigment particle sizes. It's larger in the French ultramarine blue. Not everyone's going to love it. I like it, so it's going to be a personal preference. Also remember the brand is going to make a difference. Every brand is going to be slightly different, even if they use the same pigment numbers. And have a little bit of a gliding stroke there. Now that comes forward. And again, I could add a little more detail right through here. I was hesitating on that, but why not? Remove the extra water and soften that edge, not on top, along the side, so we have our shape. I could add a little more here. Again, I could fine tune it. I could go more here. Let's go to our center stamens. I think that's working out really nicely. Okay, so I have some things that I wanted to talk about before I show you the center stamens, and I might zip through that a little bit faster. But I saw some questions in the chat, and I wanted to show you the plastic sheet that I'm working on. I also put a link to this in the chat. And out here we have Tat Plastics, and you can see that these are the HDPE matte sheets, and they're very thin. They're like $8, and they're fantastic. I always get the white. And when it comes to my online courses, just so you have an idea of what I have available, you can see I have a wide variety of courses, and I am going to have some interactive courses coming up soon after we do CWA, and I have Watercolor Live coming up. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the arches and the Saunders, because it really depends on the type of the feeling I want to get in the painting. If I want something softer like this one right here, I approached that with the Saunders paper, and it took me longer to build my color up. It had a softer sizing, and it was a challenge to get the depth back there, but it has a softer kind of dreamy look to it. If I want something with a lot of color intensity and drama, then I'm going to go for the Arches paper. And then as far as using a black and white value copy or photograph, I don't. And what was, I just never used it. And what was interesting is when I had one of my students who did landscapes, and she always made a black and white value photograph or a study. And I know that a lot of you are told or maybe do that, and I know it's helpful, but I kind of see values differently in a color image, so I just go for it. And then when it comes to the background for this particular one that I'm working on, you don't have to have indigo. You could have it in dance from blue. You can do the wet into wet like I was just talking about a little bit here, even though this one is not done, and this definitely not done. It has no depth here, but that is another option. And then since I'm mentioning backgrounds, I'm going to go to this right here, because I also have a backgrounds course, but to give you an idea, just taking little pictures of different kinds of backgrounds without an actual main subject can really be helpful. And even if you don't, I like to create a bank or a little reference bank of that. I don't usually go back to it, but it'll still give you ideas of how you may approach a background in a painting. And then to break it down into technique, what we do in our backgrounds course, you can see here we've got a wet into wet, or making circles and doing negative painting, or lifting color out, or doing the traditional salt and the saran wrap. So you have lots of different options. So for this painting here, I could approach it differently. But this way, it has drama, it has punch. Even though it's a white flower, if I wanted to create something with color, it's the same basic idea. And I especially like to do white flowers. Okay, and then let's see. When it comes to the French ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, I like to use the Winsor & Newton French ultramarine blue burnt sienna blend, because I like how the two colors separate and it creates a two-tone effect. And with other brands, like I do love Daniel Smith, but I don't care for the French ultramarine blue burnt sienna blend, because that can actually go a little more black and a dull or gray. It's with a Winsor & Newton, it has more of a blue-gray look to it. And then what I wanted to do next is just show you the little white spots and the stamens, and continue with that. Joe, is that okay?
Yes, you're doing great.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, then let's go ahead and continue with those center stamens. And if I think any part of that is boring, I'll zip through it. Okay.
This is going to be green with the rest of burnt sienna at the end. We have these, which are pretty much white. Let's see, how can I separate that? My plan is to apply water, put the green on the top, let it spill down, and go from there. Then I want to go darker inside, but I'm not thinking about that yet. So I'm going to start with one. I'm going to try to get a little bead of water right in here. Bring it out. And then I'll go to a number 8. I'm going to take a permanent sap green right here. I want a bit more water in there. And I want it to be just like a little bead. Let's see what'll happen. I'm going to try to apply that. And really what I want it to do is to touch that water so it travels on its own. Now I could add a little Hansa yellow into it, but it doesn't seem to want to travel. I'm curious if it's that paper. I don't know. Let's see. If I add a little yellow into it, the yellow has a tendency to travel and move. So I'm going to use the number 3, and I'm going to try to pull it down. Just going along. That was a little too yellow. Try to soften that, maybe a little blue, and just bring it down along that pencil line. So I'm basically just trying to fill it in. My plan was that it was going to travel on its own, but it didn't want to. Then I'm going to do the same thing to some of these other ones. I'm going to get water right in here, bring it all the way almost out. Maybe I just didn't have enough water on my brush. You could always mix your own blue to, or green if you wanted. Now there's my water. I don't want it to be all green, so I'm going to take the 3 and I'm going to try to guide it down that path of water. Okay, so we've got a couple in there. So I think what I'll do, instead of that little one, I'll focus on the large one. I'm going to do the same thing, get water right in the center. I'm not worried about the pencil lines, stay away from them, just close. I could incorporate a little, I'll take a little indigo or French ultramarine blue, either one. I want it to be a little bluer, a little darker green. It is interesting how it doesn't want to travel. If it's on arches, it seems to travel more. So, interesting. Okay, I'm trying to take the water up to my pencil line. Pull it down. That's also allowing everything else to dry. I'm going to go a little bit more to French ultramarine blue and a little tiny bit of indigo to make this darker up here. So I'm thinking with these other ones, maybe I will just do wet on dry instead of wet, wetting it and then doing it. Let's see. I'm going to try to bring my stroke out a little bit more. Maybe I'll just bring it right in here so I don't have to wait so long. I think I'd like to clean up that line a little bit more. That's looking all right. I'm just evaluating as I go. Maybe add a little more green right in there. And let's see, what do we have here? Maybe just a few of these shadows in a lighter value, so I'll bring in more water. This should be dry when I do this, but it's not. It's just what I saw in here. I just wanted a little tiny bit of a lighter value here. Okay, and then I want to go darker in that center. So what I need to do is actually dry this. 1 second. I think maybe I could actually do this. Oops. Oops, that's not good. I've got indigo on myself. Let's go ahead and try to take care of that. I'm going to go darker right in there. I'm going to bring a little indigo into that. Now I was going to wait for this to dry, so we'll see. I'm going to go darker right in there. I'm going to drop it in. You will have less problems on, it's not really a problem. What that means is it's just taking longer to build that color density. Okay, right through there. Maybe I'll add a little tiny bit more right through here. I'm going to go back to my 14, soften that. That could be cleaned up a little bit more. Then I'm going to go darker with that background, I think. Permanent sap green. And glazed over this. I was going to glaze over with the indigo. But I wanted to see what this looks like. That might be interesting. We'll have to see what it looks like once it dries. Like right here, I'm looking at this one and I thought, okay, that's white. I don't really want.
I'm going to push this ahead a little bit so you get the idea. It's a green back here, so you can see that. And then we have trying to get a little more contrast deep inside the flower. And then glazing over the green again with an indigo, so I can get more depth in the background. But there is an area that I want to show you. I'm trying to get to the point here that I think is important. Okay, I'm going to go back to this. Okay, to pull out, like the Casablanca lilies have or all lilies have these funny little spots in them, and I think that you might find this interesting.
I don't think these little holes are going to be big enough.
I'm using this as a template.
I've got a little bit of shading here. I could touch it with water and lift it, but I think this is going to maybe do it just a little quicker for me. I could put tape around those holes that are exposed. That's not really any big deal there. There's just a little bit here. I'm getting some of those little white spots back. If you want them, you can reshape them to get those, I do not know what they would call those. Gives it a bit more character. And depth. Now what oh, here. Okay, here's my reference photo. I see I've got a few spots there. I've got a couple here, a couple here. So I'm going to take this. This will work fine. Anything with small holes. And I was going to start here, work my way up, but I'm going to start on the top and work my way down. I think that gives it a nice little detail. I'm tapping this on my paper towel to remove any excess water. Okay, so I dried this, and I'm thinking I might come in with a number 3 Sable Synthetic Blend, and I really want more of my blue-gray color, but I'm going to take my palette mud, and let's see, where am I? Let's start with someplace like this. I'm just going to go around this a little bit. Just a few little shadows. Because that little tiny touch is going to make those stand out. Then let's put a mat on this, if we want that, or we can actually just lay it on top and float it and call it done.
There we go. So that's pretty much the demonstration that I planned on. And so, Joe, do you have any comments or questions?
Well, I'm always impressed with your number 30. I think you should call that a magic brush, because getting those curls and making that the shadows make the form of the petals, I think is pretty amazing.
I'm going to show you something else here. So, okay, so when I first started out all those years ago, I had a brush that was very similar to this. This is the Silk Star brush, and I could never find it again. I did a demonstration at an art store, and they gave me this brush, and I had no idea how I was going to use it. And I used it all the time, especially for my giant 40 by 60s, and I was able to lay down these smooth washes and layer upon layer without lifting the previous layer. And by doing these brushes, I was able to understand that if you use a synthetic brush and you're trying to get that soft layering, it can actually scrape the paper, and you can end up with lines. So anyway, I couldn't find this brush again. So then I found this one, which was the 30, and I used this for years. And I love it. And it is, like you said, like a magic brush, and it's just beautiful. But this is the one that I used originally, and I found it again, and I highly suggest this. This has like an onion tip, and you just have to adjust the amount of water that you put on there. And also, you'll see my towel next to my palette. That's an old terry cloth towel, and I just dab my brush on there so it absorbs the water, and I don't worry about any color that's on the brush. So anyway, I just wanted to say that about the brushes.
So if anybody has any questions for Birgit, you can put them in the message chat, or if you want to ask her directly, you can do that. I do have one question, Birgit. Looking at that rose that's on the easel in the back, and also over to the other side, you have those cream colored flowers. How do you avoid, when you do a white flower like that with a tint in it, getting mud? It's when you start, I played with this, when you start adding the shadows, it seems like I always end up going to mud instead of it looks like you got very clean color there.
I think that, we get to a point where we think we're making mud, and we have to kind of go past that.
Okay.
So you have to get out of your own way, because what was really interesting, let's see which one. We have that one back there, and I have this one right here. Okay, so now I did this one. Let me see if I can find it. I did one very similar to this. It's around here somewhere, but I did one very similar to this, and I was using the French ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, and I really loved it as is, but it was a little cooler. It just had a different feel, and I wanted something warmer here. And I changed the color palette that I usually use. I ended up with a cobalt blue and a raw umber, something that I wouldn't normally think of. And I also added a quinacridone pink. So I used the Winsor & Newton cobalt blue and raw umber, and then a Daniel Smith quinacridone pink. And I loved this. So, and then it takes multiple layers to get in here. And I know what you're saying, but it just takes lots of layers.
Okay. I also noticed that even in that painting and the one that you did for the demo, almost all of your shapes are soft. You have very few hard lines other than obviously the outline of the flower, but in terms of the shadow, almost all of them seem to be soft. Is that something that you typically strive for in a flower, or and do you always follow the photo on your shadows, or are you just kind of going along to what looks good for you?
Well, I used to have a lot of hard shadows, so this is one, we'll go to the shadow thing first. So like this one, it also brings a crispness to it by having that harder shadow. But something now that I'm intrigued with is depth is really important to me. So if I'm looking at this now, I may not have it be as hard as this. If I want to push that back the way I am at this point, I would probably even glaze over that with water to soften those edges. But it really depends on where I'm at and what I'm thinking. I like both. And I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Well, I think they were kind of combined, but yeah, it just seems like your ratio to hard lines to shadows is very few hard lines other than outlining the petal. But in terms of the shadows, they're pretty much soft all around.
It's interesting. It's just really interesting to hear you say that, because I was always doing the hard lines. So like looking at this one here, what I was thinking about, what I've done in the past was make that a hard line. This would be a very hard line down here. And this time I didn't want that. I wanted to keep the focus right here, draw the viewer in more. And I didn't want that hard line to be distracting. So I would glaze over that, even if it's just with a little water or just a little tint or a little color here and then clean water. Like this is where the Silk Star brush would work nicely. That way I'm not lifting that previous layer down here.
Okay.
Yeah.
A couple questions in the chat, Birgit. How much time do you spend on your drawing? It seems to me that it's very important.
Well, actually, with my line drawing is pretty as simple as I can get it. And in fact, that makes me think about what the question was before about the reference photo. I use the reference photo as an idea, as a design, and I get an idea of where the shadows are. But then I'll take it to where I need it to go, because I have to decide, what do I want to come forward? What do I want to push back? And let's see, for this one here, like I already know where my shadows are, but if I really want to pull, see, the light's not so good on this. I think it's kind
Oh,
of,
looks fine.
does it? Okay.
Yeah.
So I want this one to come forward, even though I have this lighter back here. I might go a little darker here. I need the contrast, so I'm going to think about that. But also, if I want to pull this one out, I'm going to think about going over both of these in a slightly darker value, because I don't really need a shadow because I already have this here, but I need a value shift on there. So this is where the reference photo, I'm separating from the reference photo because I have to look at what's happening on the paper and go work with that.
Okay. And somebody asked the name of the big brush, the number 30 that you're using.
Well, this one I have them on my website, but you can also get them a Cosmotop Mix B. And also this is a Silk Star brush, a Da Vinci. They're both Da Vinci brushes.
They're both Da Vinci, and the 30s are Da Vinci Cosmotop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then let's see what else we had here. Lots of great comments.
I see one from Barbara about, do I prefer extra white versus natural? So, I have always used natural. I am not really a bright white fan. And I think, it's just I've always used natural when it comes to arches. But then when I got the Saunders paper, the natural has a very yellow cast to it, of more creamy. So what we have back here, right, right there. So then it has a different feel to it. It really depends on a personal preference.
Okay. And how about your reference photos? Somebody's asking about where you get your reference photos from.
Oh, me.
So you
From my
take,
garden. This is actually from my garden, that's from my garden right there. I think, trying to think if that, maybe that was, I think that this was one of my students up here that had that, but the rest of them, or something I bought, like from the store.
yeah. And then you use 300-pound or 140-pound. Is you have a favorite or a choice?
Well, it really depends. Like, so most of the time, let me just say 300-pound. But if I'm doing the little video or the wherever I put that little one I just had here, the little thing like this, that one, since it really isn't like a significant painting, it's something that's a little demo, something light. I'll do that on 140, and it's not so much. Well, the real reason for the 140 is it has a smoother texture to it. It doesn't have the beef to it. It doesn't have the meat. If I want something dramatic, I'm going to use the 300. And the color intensity. Also, like when it comes to the 300, you can see here, this has a lot more clarity. I know not everybody's going to love working on the 300. I also like that it lays flat. I don't attach my paper to a board if I can help it. If I'm doing a landscape, maybe, it depends. But this here is also using the technique that we just did in that little video. And let's see, these are just different paintings here. They're that's not what we were just working on, but something like that.
Somebody who's attending the workshop mentioned that you were looking for the paper to use in the workshop, a 300-pound arches. She can't find it at Blick. Is Fabriano okay?
Yeah, well, Fabriano has a softer size surf. I do like Fabriano. I like Fabriano for when I do actually like portraits, or it has a softer sizing to it, so it's not going to flow in exactly the same way. But yes, you can do it. I'm surprised that you can't find the arches.
Yeah,
So,
you might do an Amazon search and you'll probably come up with it on Amazon at a different place.
but we're going to work with whatever you have.
Yeah.
And, so don't worry about it. And also, if Barbara, I see that you say there that arches is that Blick doesn't have it. Have you tried Cheap Joe's, and are you using the mail order Blick, or is that the local Blick? Because I like to mail order. Makes it
Also,
easier.
if you're here in the local area, Flax carries a good selection of papers down in Oakland or San Francisco. But I found that you can almost get anything you need at Amazon.
Oh, and Berkeley Blick. Okay, all right. I don't know about San Francisco, if how that, you might want to try mail ordering it.
Here we
And
go.
then Bill just said Cheap Joe's has a sale on arches. That's nice.
I think that's all the questions I see. Anybody else have any questions?
I can keep on going, and I can do more demos, but I think that maybe we should save that for the workshop.
Well, we're pushing our 9 o'clock hour here, so I think we're doing well. Oh, somebody wanted you to give the name of the white brush again.
Oh, that is a Silk Star. I
Silk
also
Star.
have these too. So that is a Silk Star.
Okay.
So Joe, do we go to 9 o'clock? I mean, do you want me to show you more?
Sure.
Okay.
We still have 80 people in the room, so yeah.
Okay. Then I'm going to switch over.
And just so you know, we have about 15 minutes.
That's okay. So what I'm thinking about, let me just go back to this because I wanted to experiment with this. Let me find one. Okay. Now, I think I'll work with this one for just a second. I'm thinking, do I really want to do that? That's where I'm at. Okay, so I already have my shadows in here, and I have this indigo back here. And by if I put water over any of these areas, it's going to lift some of that indigo a little bit. And that's one reason why I usually worked on the flower instead of getting the background in, because I wanted clarity along here. But now at this point of my painting career, that I have a different attitude. So what I'm going to do is just show you what I'm thinking here. I want to push this back, pull this forward. And let's see, let's get to my brushes. I'm going to use the number 20. So I have some color on my brush here. I don't really want it there, but I have it there. So I'm going to use that, or you can see that too. So I'll put it over here. All right, I'm going to go back to my French ultramarine blue burnt sienna blend. And I've been shifting away from that, actually. I've been doing more of the cobalt blue, like I mentioned. But I'm going to go ahead and try this. Try to get a little space. I don't want it to be too brown. I don't want it to be too blue. And I'm also thinking about this brush. If I apply a stroke here, what can happen is if I don't move fast enough, I can end up with a line that I don't want. So maybe what I would do is take some water on another brush and just add a little buffer of water. Now, I've never done it to this painting, but I'm going to do it now. All right, I want to bring more attention here, because we were talking a little bit about shadows. Maybe I want a little more blue or burnt sienna. Add a little more shape here. This is wet, and I'm just doing this more of a wet and wet right here. And then I might use that Silk Star, or the 30, or the Hake, and soften an edge. But don't be afraid to take it another step further. I don't think that was that dramatic, but I think you get the idea. And I could even do wet on dry here. What can happen is that you just don't move fast enough and you end up with lines that you don't want. And then down here, that looks pretty flat. Maybe you can see the difference. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this has just a very subtle shade up here, and this has a very abrupt line. And maybe I'll go wet on dry here. Let's try something different. Then soften that. So this is just taking what I did in that demonstration and applying it to a different type of painting. Okay, so I think that that's pretty good right now. And actually, if we look at this, that's pretty flat. That's flat. So I would have to take this idea and bring that up here. Okay. Yeah. So I think if I start on other paintings, that's probably not a good idea. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Anybody? You can unmute yourself and ask directly if you'd like.
Yeah. Look at those shy people.
Everybody's being shy.
I know people that I could say hello
to. Well, thank you again, Birgit. I always love your work. I love your teaching style, and we're real excited about the workshop. Again, if you are interested, even though the workshop is full, get your name on the waiting list. We might have a little surprise there, but it doesn't hurt to put your name on the waiting list. Very often we're able to get people in off of the waiting list. Also, for those folks out there that aren't members, that are guests tonight, we'd love to have you join us at CWA. You can go to our website, CaliforniaWatercolor.org, and check out our membership and what the membership benefits are. You definitely will get newsletters that let you know when we're having these monthly meetings and other demos, and so you won't miss anything. And we're excited about this year, 2023. We're getting back into live workshops as well as keeping the virtual workshops because they've been very popular. And we're hoping down the road to have a live general meeting where we get back together as a group as well. So again, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Birgit. Thank you, Pat Wave, helping us out. And Michelle, who's normally here, says hi from Hawaii, or aloha, I guess she'd be telling us. And she'll be back with us next month. So again, everybody, thank you very much. Everybody have a great evening. Stay dry. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for coming, everyone, and happy painting.
All right. Thank you, Birgit.
Okay, bye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.